Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Stephanie Raber. I'm a dyslexic, and I was asked today to tell you guys a bit more about my personal story with dyslexia. I actually knew at a pretty young age that I was dyslexic because my dad already knew he was dyslexic. He's in his 70s now, so he was probably one of the first who knew. But when he went to school and he was actually punished all the time for being lazy and stupid, etc., my grandmother already saw like, hey, there's something going on. He's definitely not stupid. So they went on this little search and they were lucky enough to find this one teacher who had heard something about dyslexia. And she quickly noticed that my dad was a dyslexic. And once my dad was diagnosed, there was all my uncles, all his cousins, so actually the whole Raber family. So when I went to school and there were all these red stripes in my work, in my test, it was pretty clear that it was time to test me too. And I actually definitely passed that test. So, but I was lucky enough that my parents had the resources to give me all the remediation I needed, actually my whole time through primary school. But whatever I did, it didn't matter how hard I would work. I was always being seen and get my results based on the things that I couldn't do. There were always these remarks in my test where I look for your focus, and there are always these little, which we call in Dutch slordigheidsfoutjes, so these little, actually they still call me lazy in a way. So I got to the point where I said, it doesn't really matter what I do, it doesn't really matter how I work. And I just went into the survival modus. In our Dutch system where we go from 1 to 10, it's like 5.5. Everything I do above that is I work too hard. And apparently I was pretty good at that because I have report cards from my high school with only 6 on it. But it does definitely have an impact on you if you do that. Because that feeling of not being seen for what you're capable of doing, it takes away all your creativity at a certain point. So I went through HAVO because I thought I just have to get through this time. And I went to the next, I did international business. And eventually I went to university. And in university, for this first time, I really had that fun learning again. I was intellectually finally challenged again to think about things instead of just asking that question and just having to do that, like just saying the right answer. It was a different experience for me. And I really enjoyed that. So I studied economics here at the VU University and started working. And once I started working, things got easier for me, but also pretty complicated still. As I just did what I did, and I went really fast. But my colleagues had a hard time understanding me. That's what I see very often with more junior dyslexics, is that they're hard understood because we want to take that next level again already. So once my niece went to school, I was stunned how little had changed since I went to school. And especially that feeling again for her self-esteem maybe. And I really saw that little girl with that struggling with the fact that she was not seen for what she was capable of doing. And that really impacted me. I started working, and I just worked in English mostly. So that was kind of easier to me because I wasn't really, once I have to start writing in Dutch, it gets hard because people really feel like English is my second language. So people look at that differently. And in Dutch, that's totally different. But seeing her again, that really impacted me. And at that time, I started my own company. I worked at mostly companies. I was in consumer licensing, so I worked for Sanrio, which is the brand owner of Hello Kitty. I worked for MGA, which is another toy company in the US. Flew all over the world. It was an amazing experience. I was able to do that as an entrepreneur. But then when seeing my niece, I knew I had to do something. I started doing some research on dyslexia. And here in the Netherlands, all I saw was how to fix me, the reading and writing, which was kind of interesting because I had no clue what my dyslexia was. It's not like anybody at school had ever explained me what my dyslexia was. They just tried to fix me. And this just made me better at reading and writing. And it did. But yeah. So when I went to school, when I started working and I saw my niece, and I knew I had to start doing things differently. And one of the books, I went to the US actually, because I noticed there was way more research out there already. And one of the books I came across was Dyslexic Advantage. And that's a book written by two psychologists, and neurologists, I believe too, but they work with a lot of dyslexics. And what they noticed is they noticed all the same strength. They saw a lot of challenges, but they also noticed the same strength over and over and over again. So they went looking for the research. And this book explains a lot about the challenge. But for the first time, I understood my own brain too while reading this book. Because it really showed how dyslexia is that different way of thinking, a different way of processing information. So all these things which I would have never connected to my dyslexia finally made sense. So we see some of the strength, they call them the mind strength, where they see that dyslexics have this visual spatial strength. So many of us have 3D, they really see in 3D. So that's why there's so many dyslexic architects, so many artists, for example. But we also are stronger when it comes to storytelling. Our episodic memory is stronger. So we actually have a lot of dyslexic authors who are amazing with words. Just the spelling might be a little bit of a challenge. And one I really like is the dynamic reasoning, they say. So with this big picture thinking, most people will think from A to B in steps. Dyslexics, and most neurodivergent, we think in B, we think in that end result. And that was probably one of the most interesting to me, because I used to be in team meetings and I already saw the result. It felt like I was 6 steps ahead and was way faster than everybody else. So I would be in that meeting and I was like, come on guys, hurry up. Because it usually took like another hour. It's like, okay, that's exactly what I said in the beginning. And that does make me better, but it's just a different way of processing my information. And we need to find a way to understand each other. But at first I had to understand myself. And because of the big picture thinking, we're amazing problem solvers. We can connect certain information, which others usually don't see. But that can also be a big challenge, especially in school, for example. If you're always looking for the way that things will work, like with tests, for example, it's very hard for me. Not that I cannot read the question, but I'll look into every question and say, yeah, that depends on how you look at it. Because I can usually connect all this information. So that's a trick I really had to learn at school, how to make a test. Not just what it was all about, but also how to really answer those questions. So with all this information, and especially also knowing the impact it had on self-esteem, and that numbers are there, I think 30% of dyslexic, we have a higher rate of depression and anxiety, huge numbers of addiction. So I knew I had to do something, and that's why we started together with Tamara Freke. I started the Hoy Foundation. And our big mission is to change that negative stigma of dyslexia. We want it to be seen for what it is. It is a different way of processing information. With challenges, definitely, but also with a lot of strength. Because we live in a society now where, we still see reading and writing connected to intelligence, but also our school system is made in such a way that we all have to fit through that same mold. We all have to fit. If you're a square, you don't fit through a circle. But we keep on pushing. We say something is wrong with you. So that's why I always have trouble with hearing the word that I have a learning disability. I don't have a learning disability. I learn differently, yes. I process my information differently, but it's not a disability. I'm pretty good at learning. You just have to give me the information differently. So what we really promoting is that we say like curing the negatives does not produce the positive. I'm grateful for all the extra effort that's out there, for all the remediation. But that also there's also a different side of that coin, because we do that. Kids mainly tend to feel like they need helplessness, we need support with everything. And this doesn't stop at school. That's usually where it starts. And especially in transformative years, you hear day in, day out what you cannot do. Then you go studying. And a lot of people even, at a certain point, your parents are not there, for example, or you have to do, you start doing things, you have to really start how to learn differently. And then we go work and we have to start this whole recruitment process. Well, for me, writing a letter, that's like probably one of the hardest things you can ask me. Once I start talking, things are pretty much okay. But that letter part, or almost every job description still says excellent language skills written. And I'm like, oh, there we go. So even we lose a lot of talent because our recruitment systems are often still pretty biased for dyslexics in general, and for neurodiversity as a whole, but also in this part for dyslexics. And then we go work, and like I said, because we process information differently, most dyslexics don't know, and mostly your team members won't know. So I hear most dyslexics say, it's like people don't understand me. And often they don't. And that's also what we do. With the Hoy Foundation, we focus mostly on kids. So we have our Happy Dyslexic program. We have a curriculum from the US for kids from 10 to 14, where they constantly see by doing what they're capable because they're dyslexic and not despite them being dyslexic. We support parents, teachers. We're more and more doing training in school. And we now also founded Dyslexic Disruptors to really make sure that also in the workplace, we start to understand each other. As dyslexics, we have to be empowered because, I didn't know anything about my dyslexia, and I see that most dyslexics have no clue that usually those about their strength and how that's connected to dyslexia. But also make sure the team members understand it, because if we build these diverse teams, we know from the numbers, teams can be 30% more productive already. I would say, if you want the book Dyslexic Advantage, that's definitely one of my tips. It's a little scientific, but it has a summary everywhere. It's called Dyslexie als Kans in Dutch. And that's a great start to just have that eye-opener of, okay, to first start to see your skills. So for now, that's a short story of why I started becoming an advocate for dyslexia. I also really believe that it's the right thing to do, but it's also the right thing for business, because together we can really make sure that dyslexia or neurodiversity can really become your competitive advantage as a dyslexic yourself within the company, but also for the organization as a whole. So I would like to thank you, and if there are any questions, I'm sure I can answer them by email or in a chat option anywhere. Thanks.